For over 40 years, this 12-story condo had been the perfect place to call home. With the beachside view and a pool to enjoy, it was the ideal spot. But on the night of June 24, 2021, the building collapsed. In just a few seconds, it not only turned into a pile of rubble, but 96 lives were lost. All that remained was the broken pool deck, half-standing columns, and concrete chunks. Hi, I'm Mohsin Khan, an engineer here in New York City, and today we'll look into the Miami condo collapse, one of the deadliest building collapses in American history. On June 24, 2021, at 1:15 a.m., the pool deck of Champlain Tower South collapsed. And the very next minute, at 1:16 a.m., the security guard at the front desk, scared and confused, called 911, but couldn't explain how bad the situation really was.
Okay.
I'm trying to track them.
Hurry up, there's a big explosion.
Okay, sir, tell me exactly what happened. Sir, what's going on? Tell me exactly what happened.
I don't know, there's a lot of smoke going on. I can't see anything right now.
You see smoke?
Get out of here.
Sir? Hello?
Before any help could arrive, at 1:22 a.m., the city witnessed a disaster that would change everything. This 12-story condo building where over 100 families lived is completely gone. But this tragedy could have been avoided, because back in 2018, an engineering report done by Morabito Consultants actually flagged serious problems. It warned about major structural damage, including the exact issues that would later cause the collapse. It pointed out deteriorated concrete and damage to the column, but unfortunately, it seems like no real action was taken. Apparently, they were focused on closing the pool for repairs instead. This first interpretation does seem to make sense. After all, a lot of what we know about the Surfside condo collapse points in that direction. Engineers and investigators noticed signs of trouble pretty early on. Cracks in the concrete, water getting into places it shouldn't, and parts of the structure slowly wearing away over time. It wasn't some big sudden thing out of nowhere. It was slow. It built up over years. Tiny problems that didn't look like much at first, till eventually they added up to something impossible to ignore. This is often how buildings, even solid concrete ones, can fail. Not because of one dramatic mistake, but because of lots of smaller things being missed or left alone for too long. In Surfside, that's what makes the story especially heartbreaking. People were living their everyday lives, never imagining that the ground beneath them was slowly starting to crumble. It turned out that around 1:15 a.m., before the building had collapsed, it was this particular section, the poolside area, which had gone first. This really put things into perspective, as now it seemed pretty obvious that the slab had started this domino. You might be wondering, how can just one slab of concrete hold up an entire building? And honestly, it's a good question to ask. How do these slab foundations work? This is the kind of foundation system you'll find in a lot of buildings, like the Champlain Towers. If you look at the bottom, you'll see these vertical supports, or what we call a pile. Think of them as the main legs of the building. They go all the way down, and basically, they're there to carry the entire weight of the building on top of it. Now, sitting right above those piles is this big, thick concrete layer called a pile cap. Basically, it's a super strong layer of concrete built to take the weight of the building on top through the columns and spread it throughout the area and into the pile it's sitting on. From there, the rest of the building gets stacked right on top of that. All the floors where people live or work. Those upper floors have their own columns and walls, and all of that transfers the load down to the foundation slab and the pile caps at the bottom, which then transfers the load to the piles in the solid ground underneath. With that kind of structural system in mind, let's go back to what happened that night. Remember, pool deck was the first part of the building to fail, and that's our clue to where the problem first started. But what you notice is that the entire 12-story building didn't come down all at once. It actually took a few more minutes, about 7, getting us to about 1:22 a.m. for the rest of the building to fully collapse. The answer boils down to something called progressive collapse. Even though it started at the pool, that failure caused a massive jolt of stress on the rest of the building instantly. The structure was already in bad shape, weakened over the years by damage to the concrete and waterproofing. It just couldn't take that sudden shift in weight. To understand why that initial failure happened, let's use the example of a tightrope stretched between two poles. If it's not held tight or supported well enough, even a little bit of extra weight in the middle can make it droop down too much or even break. And that's sort of what's going on underneath in a structural sense. What investigators found was that the pool deck slab didn't have enough steel rebar. This meant it wasn't strong enough to properly distribute the weight. Also, the columns underneath were too small for the weight they were supposed to carry. Over time, this caused the slab to slowly sink around the columns, which led to a structural problem called punching shear failure. This is a type of sudden failure where slabs are around concentrated loads like the column, and it looks like the column punches through the slab. But even with these weaknesses, the building was still standing, not because it was stable, but because something else was keeping it together. the beams connecting the building and the pool deck slab. They used a drop beam with an L-shaped rebar connecting to the first floor, but there was no L-shaped rebar connecting to the pool deck. The investigation suggests that it was the wall beam connection that finally set everything off, and we can actually see this. Look at this picture taken right before the tower collapsed. You see, these cracks are telling us that there's something seriously wrong with the structure. The heavy planters put too much weight on the pool deck slab and it couldn't support it. Concrete around the column broke away, the deck fell down into the garage, and that's when the collapse started to spread. Experts looked at the rubble to get the bigger picture and revealed something quite interesting. Turns out, the building itself had a hidden flaw in its design, and it had been there for decades. In an article for the Miami Herald, Sarah Blasky explained, Champlain Tower South was flawed from the very beginning. A lot of the columns were designed too slim for the building, especially in the most important spots. And what's worse is that the builders, who we call the contractor, actually squeezed them even smaller just to get more parking space. Let's look at this diagram. These dots show where the columns were placed to hold up the concrete slab base. But what the investigation found is that these red and yellow sections show where the columns were either not up to code or just super slim compared to the rest. You could see here that only the green ones were actually good enough, and it kind of makes sense why only that green part of their building didn't collapse. Professor Don Lemon, who provided expert commentary, looked at all of this and said, "It's amazing to me that something like this didn't fail earlier." Now let's look at some of the other things that had been weakening it underneath for years and what could have been the very last straw. You see, these are the very cracks that allowed water to seep in. This water then started to rust the steel rebar inside, and once the rusting process begins, the steel starts to get weaker, and the steel inside this building was deteriorating for many decades. Another finding by Morbido Consultants was pretty alarming. The waterproofing had failed, and it was causing major damage to the concrete below. It warned that if the waterproofing wasn't replaced soon, the deterioration would only get worse, much worse. If you look at the report, you'll see that they focus on the pool deck and the surrounding areas. It clearly stated that the waterproofing had reached the end of its life and needed to be replaced entirely. They also noted significant cracking and spalling, basically chunks of concrete breaking off on the columns, beams, and walls right under the pool deck and entrance. So this wasn't just a surface issue, it was impacting key structural elements. Even though these issues were documented by engineers, it looks like nobody did anything right away to fix them. Now, these repairs weren't going to be cheap. The report gave an initial estimate of around $3.8 million in 2018 to handle the concrete repairs and replace the waterproofing for the pool deck, plaza, and garage. That's a hefty price tag, and it's probably safe to say that money played a part in why nothing was done. In the years before the collapse, there was this big construction project right next door at 87 Park. This was a large-scale project going on from 2015 to 2020 and involved some pretty intense construction work basically right beside the tower. The developers of 87 Park even got the city to hand over the road next to Champlain Tower South, and they built parts of their foundation right up against the south wall of the building. During all that construction, people living in Champlain Tower South kept saying they could feel the vibrations from 87 Park's foundation work. And it wasn't just a little shaking. Could feel these vibrations everywhere on their property. What's even more concerning is that some residents began noticing new cracks popping up in their own apartments and on their balcony walls during this time. So they called back that same engineering company, Morbido Consultants, who had given that warning report in 2018 to come check it out again. And yeah, new damage had appeared right there on the south side of the pool deck, where the slab meets the wall, exactly where they think the collapse began. But even with all these complaints and the engineers saying there was new damage, nobody was evacuated. And they didn't put in any emergency fixes like temporary supports to hold up part of the building while they figured out what to do about the repairs. One thing's for sure, it wasn't just a single thing that went wrong here. It really looks like a bunch of problems all came together in a terrible way. There were clear warnings, and for whatever reason, they weren't acted on. That's a really hard thing to accept. So in the end, the officials had to make the tough decision. They ended up demolishing the rest of the building too. Honestly, the call was really driven by safety above all else. Engineers deemed it too risky for anyone to be around, especially with rescue teams still on site looking for survivors. The concern was that it could come down at any moment, which would have been catastrophic. Plus, taking down the rest of the building actually helped with the investigation. With that part still standing, it was blocking access to debris and making it harder for investigators to understand what had gone wrong. But by bringing it down in a controlled way, they could finally get a much better look at the whole scene. But there's still an important question. Who's to blame for all of this? It's a complicated issue and the investigation is still ongoing. But when you think about it, everyone involved played a part. The engineers who originally designed the building, the condo board responsible for maintaining it over the years, and even those who were supposed to check if it was safe. This whole tragedy shows just how crucial building safety is and how everyone needs to be vigilant all the time. Ignoring glaring red flags just can't happen. At the core of this disaster is trust. We trust these buildings to keep us safe, and when that trust is shattered in such a devastating way, makes you wonder, are we doing enough to ensure something like this never happens again? What do you think needs to change? Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments section below. Until next time.